Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited to have with us today Michael Gurian. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about our boys and their brains, and we're going to be discussing how to support boys' emotional intelligence and their learning styles, and a little bit about some of the upcoming political climate that we live in the western part of the world. I am really excited to interview Mike today because I'm very immersed in his research. I'm a mom boy. I have a son who's 8, and I do a lot of therapy with men and little boys and teen boys, and the therapy looks very different. So I'm really excited to explore that. And so I'll just do a quick intro and then we'll get on with this masterclass for the summit. Mike is a New York Times bestselling author of 32 books published in 23 languages. He provides counseling services in his private practice. The Gurian Institute, which he co-founded, conducts research internationally, launches pilot programs, and trains professionals. He has been called the people's philosopher for his ability to bring together people's ordinary lives and scientific ideas. Michael has pioneered efforts to bring neurobiology and brain research into homes, schools, corporations, and public policy. A number of his books have sparked national debate, including The Wonder of Girls, The Wonder of Boys, Boys and Girls Learn Differently, which is one of my favorite books you wrote, The Minds of Boys, and the one I just finished reading, which is Saving Our Sons. And then you have another book coming out called Boys, a Rescue Plan. Did I get that right?
Yep. Coming out
Okay.
soon. Yep.
Mike has spoken for the United Nations on violence against women, provided information on boys and girls' educational needs in the White House, and briefed members on the 114th Congress on the boy crisis in America. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't even know where to start with you. I just want to pick your brain. And I just love the science that backs up all of the information and the meta-analysis you include in your work. It's beautiful. And I think we have gone and done this pendulum swing where we wanted to support girls. We did. And we were doing them a disservice for such a long time. But now I feel like our boys are going through a crisis. We had our girls going through a crisis, and now we have this crisis of boys where we focus so much on gender equality, but we now forget that our boys learn differently. Their brains are different. And I guess we should say this is sex equality because gender, I know you differentiate gender, more of a social construct.
Oh, yeah, I can talk about that. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll make sure to explain that before anyone gets too upset about that. So let's just talk about this crisis. And first, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how you define these gender versus sex with this debate.
Okay, so starting with the statistics. So what we call the boy crisis. Okay, so I back when I did The Wonder of Boys, so back 30 years ago, we already could see it. And so I have even in that book 30 years ago, I have it in there, okay, better look at these stats. Look what's happening. And it's neither anti-female or anything like that. I mean, we're equity culture. So we have the resources to help everyone. So to me, it was never zero sum. It was never a debate against someone else. It was just, hey, look, already the boys were way behind in college, way behind in education. This is 30 years ago, on and on and on. And now it's just gotten worse. I mean, now the suicide statistics, the fentanyl, so addictive disorder statistics, the brain disorder statistics, ASD, ADHD, it's looking really, really grim. And then we have the boys who just can't develop, they can't mature. And I'll talk about it. I'm sure today we'll talk about kind of our abandonment of healthy male development in the West, and for all those political reasons that we did that 50 years ago. But we got to rethink it, and on and on and on. And there's no statistical area where we won't go, oh my gosh, look what's happening to these guys. Now that doesn't mean that women don't struggle. I mean, post-COVID, you've got a lot of overt depression, among girls and women that followed through there, and anxiety, social anxiety disorder. I mean, we have a lot for girls and women. So again, not a zero sum. For males, we have a lot of covert depression and the disease of violence. And then that shows up in addictive disorders, suicide, fentanyl, and withdrawal. And we talk about diseases of loneliness. Everyone will have heard these terms, diseases of despair. A lot of that is simply male. I mean, there are just more males right now dying of those diseases across the lifespan. So we want to start out by saying we're going to talk about boys because that's our subject, but it doesn't in any way downplay the struggles of girls and women. It's just that we got to get people to see what's going on with boys and men, because it's really good for girls and women to have healthy boys and men. And it's not good for girls and women to have unhealthy boys and men, right? We're all interconnected. So, and especially as people mature and they want to marry and, have kids and all of that, we got to have mature, healthy boys and men. So, not just for themselves, but for everyone else.
Absolutely. And I really like this quote from one of your books. I've read multiple books of yours, so I'm pulling stuff from everywhere here, Mike. But you say ensuring gender equality for girls and women does not require gender sameness. And
Right.
what you really highlight, especially in one of like the first book I read of yours, which was Boys and Girls Learn Differently.
Oh, yeah.
You should see how marked up this book is. It's insane.
I love it.
I was a
you.
teacher before I became a psychologist. And so I was in a kindergarten classroom, third grade, and I'm telling you, those are two different creatures, my boys and my girls, and how they learned and moved. And I never understood why. And now I'm a mom of a boy, and well, I'm married to a boy. And I notice these differences. And, it's not just social. Can you talk about a
Right.
little bit, touch on the brain science a little bit? Like, I have tons of notes here, but like, you're
Right.
the expert.
Yeah. So sexual dimorphism is a very real thing. So sexual dimorphism, I know if you look at social media, you sometimes find people going, no, there's no such thing as sexual, because there's a whole bunch of politics around this. But in real life, sexual dimorphism is a real thing. So all the way back in the late 80s, I was starting to use brain scans to show people how differently the male and the female brain operated.
And you're talking, I think we're talking chromosomal, like XY,
XXXY.
XX. So we're really talking about sex differences. I always differentiate gender and sex. And so really what Mike's talking about are sex differences based on hormonal changes and the chromosomal makeup, right? Like that's what we're mostly talking about here.
Yeah, starting in the 70s, it was slowly it happened where everything switched to gender. And it was easier for the Supreme Court that was trying a case in the 70s with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It was just easier for academics, for everyone to just say gender. Then it was easier for the media, right? And so sex, because sex was associated with reproduction and the Sex Act, everything switched to gender. But gender is a social construct. And I know we'll talk about gender nonconforming and gender fluidity in this talk. Gender is a social construct, right? It's not sex. Sex is what comes in on the X and the Y. So XX is female, XY is male. The Y chromosome triggers the mom who's carrying the baby. It triggers that little bit of androgenic hormone to go into the womb. And then that stimulates the testes to drop. And while the testes are dropping in that, that sort of 4 to 5 month period, testosterone's flooding the male system and it's not flooding the female. So that little baby boy is getting flooded with 10 to 20 times the amount of testosterone. And that will be true through the lifespan. Males get 10 to 20 times the amount of testosterone. That is a very, very powerful chemical. It differentiates the male brain from the female brain. So now there's 4 billion people on Earth, right? Or I'm sorry, there's 8 billion people on Earth. There's 4 billion ways to be boy, 4 billion ways to be girl. That's true, no doubt. But the 4 billion ways to be boy are on the boy brain, and the 4 billion ways to be girl are on the girl brain because of the sex differentiation in utero. So by 6 months in utero, the baby, the fetus, has become now immune to the cross-sex hormones. So now that brain is formed, and we in fact have, and I'll talk about what formed means because there's great variety, but the brain is formed, and as of 2019, fMRIs were used on fetuses, and already at 8 months in utero, the scientists can see that that's a male brain, that's a female brain. So they can tell it in utero. So the concept that was popular, especially in academia, what I call the big three, academics moves into government and media. That's kind of the big three. So when something happens in academia, then it moves through government and media. And the thing that happened in academia is the decision was made for sameness, right? Because we were all of us in academics, right? I go back 50 years, we were good feminists, right? And everyone was like, okay, come on, we're going to have gender equality. But the mistake that was made is that gender sameness got built in. So to have equality, everyone had to be the same. That was incorrect. It still defies the science. We all want equality and we'll get it. And women have come a huge way, but we're not the same. The 4 billion boys and the men and the 4 billion girls, women, their brains are set up differently. And if you want me to, I can give some obvious differences that everyone will recognize. And because of that, our systems need to understand boys and girls from the brain level. So nature, nurture, and culture all matter, but we gotta start with nature or our systems will not serve boys or girls, women or men. Now, 50 years ago, we made the change for women. We said, okay, that female brain is different. Women are different. we need to understand their assets. And we need to uplift their assets and alter all our systems to understand their assets. Those were female assets. Back then, it was female assets. Girls and women were female, and the female assets we had to uplift and understand. It gradually moved, though, into gender stuff, which is social construct. And so I think we still do understand that females bring assets that we need to, we need to use. Like when we try to get women to move up in corporations, we're saying we want those women, right? They're not a gender, they're women, and we need their assets. We're not doing that for boys and men, though. With boys and men, we're saying there is no male brain. We don't want to deal with that. And so that's a mistake, because now we've got systems from all across the board, systems to develop them social emotionally, counselor systems, education systems, governmental systems. Everywhere we have systems that have been created that do not understand that these guys are male. So we're just losing them by the millions.
I think so. And what was really helpful to me, and especially as an educator and who worked with young boys, and then as a mom and now a wife, trying to understand the boys in my life better. One of the things I looked at that really spoke to me was kind of like the differences in how men process information. It's completely different. Where they spend time at rest within their brain, like the limbic system versus the brain stem. I think we can maybe talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about it. Yep.
And even how women process information faster, how they handle pain versus men move towards pain. Like this stuff is like mind blowing. And if you want to connect with a boy, you need to listen to my coherent. He will explain this stuff to you. And if you're a teacher, how to accommodate these structural differences into your teaching style.
Yeah, it matters to all systems, counselor systems, education systems. Okay, so you just cut me off when you want, but I'll just do a few minutes on the brain differences so people can understand how significant this is.
Yes.
So women, I'm going to jump off some of what you said. So girls and women, so the female brain has word centers on both sides of the brain, multiple word centers on both sides of the brain. Male brains, and we should mention, these are, because they come in on XXXY, right? Even if you're XYY, right? My brain just glitched. XXY intersex. Yeah. I glitched for a sec. Even if you're, the exception intersex, your brain will still lean one way or the other toward male or female. And even with all the variety, when your brain is scanned, you'll see these differences. So girls and women on both sides of the brain, word centers. And very importantly, those word centers on both sides of the brain connect to the midbrain, where senses, memory, and emotion, right, are happening. So the female brain tends to move emotive material up very quickly, up to the top, which is where the word centers are. Not coincidentally, the female brain uses the frontal lobe, which is executive decision-making, impulse control, word production, word use, emotive processing, etc. About 80% of the time, she's in her frontal. Okay, so if she's sitting in a chair and she's looking at a book, 80% of her white matter and gray matter activity are happening in the frontal. Okay, males, he's sitting in the chair looking at a book or something. He could have 0 white matter in the frontal and only 40% gray matter, where she's got 80%. So the huge gap, not only in word production and the ability to connect feelings, memories, etc. to words, but also the fact that she's operating there in the frontal. So she's already defaulting toward impulse control, executive function, emotive processing, etc. Okay, so then you add on the white matter, gray matter activity difference. The female brain uses about 10 times more white matter activity than male. White matter is all through the myelin, and it connects the dots. So it means that her brain is connecting 20 or 30 things at once using white matter activity.
It's like telephone wires, right? So it's like processing speed is higher. Is that how I think you described as telephone wires of the brain, the white matter?
Yeah, like they're going everywhere. She's just picking it up from everywhere. And he could have fast processing as long as it's happening in the gray matter areas that he has dominated. Right, that are dominating him. Males use up to 7 times more gray matter activity. So gray matter is in splotches in the brain. It doesn't spread the signaling everywhere. Now, men have white matter activity, women have gray matter activity, of course. But this is a profound difference, because it means, to give an example to somebody, whether you're a couple, let's go with a heterosexual couple for now, so we have a male-female, whether you have a male client in your counseling practice, whether you have a boy in your classroom, it's crucial we know this, because when she is asked a question, how do you feel about that, or something like that, anything that has to do with social emotional, her brain is going to be able to almost immediately process and answer. But his brain, right, not as much in the frontal, not as many word centers, not as much connectivity, operating out of gray matter areas, some of which may have no emotive connectivity. He is going to take 12 hours, 24 hours. He can take much longer. So we call it the male delayed reaction, because his brain is not dominated by white matter activity that processes the stuff, is not dominated by frontal lobe activity. He's operating further back with less of
Right.
that. So if our systems don't know that, right, I'll give like 5 examples. If they don't know that on the playground in early childhood, they're going to shut down all male physical affection, touch attachment, male emotive activity, what I call aggression nurturance, right? They're going to shut it down. They're going to say, well, come on, you can't do karate kicks, or you can't touch that person, or you got to use your words. And it starts way, way young, right? Because they weren't trained in it. So now I work with Head Start quite a bit. My whole team works with Head Start, and we're training those teachers. Their minds are blown when they see the brain scans, and they utterly alter what they're doing, because they're like, well, I'm sorry, but now I understand these male brains, and now I understand that we can't shut all this stuff down, because that aggression nurturance is how they bond. They don't use words as much, and I can't say use your words to these 3-year-olds all the time, because they don't have their words. I got to think of other ways, to provide discipline or structure, because they don't have that emotive connectivity, and it's so delayed for them. So that, of course, affects counseling. It affects everything. Definitely affects marriage. If people say,
Oh,
a woman says to a guy, okay, what do you think, and he doesn't answer, and she feels sort of abandoned or unvalidated, but he doesn't have an answer.
no, my husband and I have had this conversation multiple times. He will come back to me the next day sometimes, and
Right.
it's a thing I've learned to negotiate this quite a few years ago, where I will bring him something and say, "I need you to think about this. This really bothered me, but I don't expect you to say anything right now. But can we please come back to this tomorrow?" And he will have something very thoughtful to say the next day.
Yep.
But I think in your book, you really delineated that men and boys spend a lot of time in their bodies, in their brain stem, in the spatial world. So it takes longer kind of for that information to work its way up to the executive functioning centers, which is all about language production and connecting feelings and sensations into like kind of like a coherent narrative. Like so they can explicate what's going on for them or apologize or explain something. And that waiting, I always tell parents when they're talking to their sons, wait. You give them information and stop talking and let them process. Come back to it. Girls will immediately, most girls will be able to come back with something. My boys take a long time. And I like sometimes it's as a therapist, it's the next session we have to come back to it. You give them a
Yep.
little something and you
Mm-hmm.
come back to it because there's that delay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the male, I'll give one example of how this is working in the brain. So when a stressor occurs, could be a trauma, but it could be just an everyday stressor. Something occurs, the male and female brain, both, everyone's brains, the amygdala is going to swell up a little. It's going to fill up with some blood flow, right? Because, I'm scared of that. That's a stressor. So in the male brain, as you mentioned, the brainstem, so males have more fluid in their brainstems anyway. And then in the male brain, the amygdala, which is in the midbrain, swells up, and more signaling goes down into the brainstem, which that means down into the body. So for females, that very same stressor, amygdala swells up, and she's moving the activity up into the frontal and, to word centers. And so people can test all this out. I always beg people to become citizen scientists and test it all out. They can watch this happen. They can see the boys who now they want to hit something, or they want to run around, or they want to punch a punching bag, or whatever the 1,000 things they want to do. You can tell their body, they're somaticizing the stress. They've moved it down through the brainstem into the limbs, the digits, right, the cells of their body, and they're trying to do something with it physically. They might, if they hit a word thing, they might be a cuss word, or it might be a quick burst. Right, I call it male quick burst activity. Female, right, she's moving it up, so she could have a quick burst. She could hit something. I mean, everyone can do anything, really, but when you statistically look at this, you see, oh yeah, absolutely. Females will tend to, process it more with words, or they'll be processing the stress internally. They'll call a friend to process the stress. They're not going to tend to beat on anything, or, and so that's one of the things that we got to know when dealing with boys that it's normal for them to somaticize their stress. And we give them the line, right? We say to them, okay, we know this is going to happen for you. So here's what you can hit and here's what you can't hit. Like you can hit a punching bag, you can go out for a run, you can yell in your car, but you can't hit people. You can't hit living things. And knowing this brain difference is like it's a perfect teaching moment and opportunity for raising the boys the way we want, because really it doesn't matter if they punch the back of the couch or if they punch a punching bag or go out for a run. That's fine, that they're processing. What we want is to make sure they're never violent to someone else. So every time it comes up, I always say, use the teaching moment. Okay, you can hit this, you can't hit that. You can't hit a pet, you can't hit anyone else. And the guys learn that. And we use this brain difference as a teaching moment to get the goal we want. But if we don't understand it, what we do is we overreact to them punching a punching bag or punching their own knee or yelling in the car or, saying a curse word or doing a fake karate kick. We overreact to that. And because we think, oh, well, wait a minute, they shouldn't have any physical reaction, right? Or they're going to beat people up. So they can't do that. And that's exactly incorrect. We want them to be hitting inanimate objects when they somaticize. They just can't hit an animate, a living object.
And this is what I tell parents. So I teach a lot of psychologists how to do therapy with little boys. And I was doing a consult with someone last week who's working with young boys in therapy. And I said, where are the swords, the handcuffs, the toy guns, the shields? These boys need aggressive toys in the room. And she's like, well, won't the parents get mad? I'm like, if they aren't allowed to be aggressive in playful ways, they will get violent with other people in inappropriate ways. Boys are meant to roughhouse. They were hunter-gatherers for a long time. There is this masculine element. We see it in the play. Girls don't play. I mean, some girls will roughhouse. I rarely see girls do sword fighting and gunplay like boys do. And parents are like amazed that in play therapy, we allow the boys they kill me and cut off my legs and they tie me up and they do all these things. And the parents are like, they're not aggressive at home anymore. And I'm like, they are supposed to do this stuff. Like they are meant to develop hierarchical relationships with each other and pummel each other and challenge each other. I'm just giving him the space to do it with me, but he's supposed to be doing this with his dad and other kids. And we make space for it in play and roughhousing so that they don't become violent.
Yeah, absolutely. We even, working with the early childhood teachers, we even talk to them about this, and they then figure out how it's allowed, right, within the rules, how it's allowed, because they see what you're seeing and what people are seeing. When they do their citizen science on this, they'll go, oh yeah, oh, that makes sense actually. And it's called aggression nurturance. So that's what I call it, aggression nurturance and empathy nurturance. So the female brain tends more toward empathy nurturance, specifically because of the insula, which is the mirror neurons, right, which create empathy. Her brain fills up with mirror neurons, and her oxytocin cells actually increase her mirror neurons for empathy. And oxytocin is a bonding chemical. Females have more of that chemical. Testosterone cells kill off mirror neurons. Males have more testosterone. So what I've understood is, okay, understanding these brain differences, the guys are still nurturing, but they're nurturing a different way. So like I tell the story of boys and girls playing a game of, like street hockey, where they're just on the street playing, they're on rollerblades, they have their little nets. And I saw this right around my house, and they're 10 to 12 years old. They're playing street hockey. A little boy falls down. Okay. And the girl on the other team stops playing the game. Even though it's a game, it's competition, they want to win. She stops. She's hit with all this oxytocin, with all these mirror neurons. She comes running over to this guy. Are you okay? Do you need a Band-Aid? Right? He skinned his knee slightly. And the guy who's his team leader, the 12-year-old guy, looks at him on his rollerblades and sees that he's okay. I mean, he hurt his knee, but he's okay. And he goes, get up, we need you. And when I give this example,
we
initially,
need you. Yeah, he said, we need
exactly.
you.
Get up, we need you. And initially people will say, well, the girl's behavior is better because she's empathic. But I argue he's just as empathic. It's just aggression nurturance. He's using aggression to nurture. He's saying, if you get back into this aggression game, that's how you'll get self-esteem. You'll have your team. We need you on this team. You're needed on it, and we'll play the game. And your foot's all right, or your knee's all right anyway. So resilience, you'll get over that, which of course the boy does. So it's so great that the girl comes over and says, do you need anything? And it's empathy nurturance. And we would not have a civilization if we didn't have empathy nurturance. Got to have it. But I would argue similarly we wouldn't have a civilization if we don't use aggression nurturance, because the get up, we need you.
That's
That's
grit.
not that's not
That's
like you're a
grit.
wuss, you know, why are you crying? You're a wuss. That's not that. He was a good leader. Get up, we need you. And then so aggression nurturance, like guys roughhousing with each other and with girls and with everyone, that's aggression nurturance. The male tendency, all these are male tendencies, and they're built into the brain because of the way the insula works, the way that the male brain works. And if we recognize these things, then we change our environments. We stop disciplining boys so much for things that are aggression nurturance, because we realize they're nurturing, they're building resilience, they're nurturing.
Yeah, and I think,
And
yeah,
it
like
doesn't change what we do with
yeah.
girls. I mean, girls still can do whatever they want.
Well, and I look at my husband. So if my son were to fall and skin his knee, same thing. My husband would be more likely to say something like, "Get up, bud, you got this." Like, he'll dust it off. Let's keep going. Like, it's not that he's not acknowledging he fell, and I will be like, "Oh, ouch, that kind of hurts." Like, I'll use an empathetic word
Right,
response, for
right.
this. But I've learned through counseling boys that you don't spend a ton of time, like, they don't do well with, "Oh, I help you," and all that, like, coddling them then through that. Boys tend to do well with like increasing the energy back up. Like, let's move on. Let's go do this and let's go tackle that problem again. And I see dads do this more, and moms seem to get really upset by this, that the dad is invalidating their pain. But I just see that's how boys often communicate, is and you talk about valor, like I don't know, maybe you can discuss that more, the
Yeah,
valor
yeah,
that comes with
yeah.
men.
Yeah, valor, courage. Yeah, what males are doing, and I call this bi-strategic parenting. So I talk about bi-strategic parenting and multi-strategic parenting. So if you have an extended family system, you're getting multi-strategic parenting because you have a bunch of people are parenting your child. But if we just look at the nuclear unit for a moment, and let's use it as heterosexual, you have a male and a female in that system, and they have female and male brains. So rather than saying to parents, be consistent in all ways, wouldn't it be better, actually? And didn't most of humanity throughout the last million years, they raised their kids bi-strategically and multi-strategically. So each parent had a role as a parent. And so in the case of male female, it's bi-strategic. You have a female brain parenting and a male brain parenting, and they both bring their assets. So yeah, I'm always begging dads, obviously, not to tell moms how to parent, and I'm always begging moms, don't tell dads how to parent. If someone's doing something really bad or mean, of course you'll correct that. But in general, the dads are parenting wisely out of their own brains, and so they're developing certain things in their kids a different way, and the mom is developing things in her kids a different way. They're both developmentally resourceful and helpful to the child. They're just doing it in a different way. And often moms will say to me, okay, the first few years I did it this way, and then I just realized my husband had some wisdom. And so, and so she go, yeah, okay, we're going to let him do that. Because, especially with the sons, because, yeah, okay, he gets them. And now you have these sensitive boys, we talk about 1 in 5 boys and girls, are highly sensitive.
High sensitive, yeah.
With the highly sensitive ones, that 1 in 5, often actually the dad's method needs some work, because those highly sensitives often, especially in their first 10 years of life before puberty, they really cleave much more toward the mom because they're
Yeah.
highly sensitive. And if the mom is fitting this model we're talking about, she's tending to give more, more mirror, more empathy and all of that. And so that's awesome. But I even think for the highly sensitives, especially once they start puberty, that is then the time where a little more dad, because they also are going to need this resilience training that comes from aggression nurturance just to function in life. So sometimes we have to developmentally kind of plan out when we're each of the most used to our kids. If they're not a highly sensitive, though, then just throughout the lifespan, I just think bi-strategic is really, really
Yeah.
important.
Well, I think you're delineating is when we have the men, and it can be grandparents, uncles. It doesn't just have to be dads, but when
Yeah.
we have that paternal, like, and that can be just an energy. Paternal nurturance is what you
Yep.
coin it
I
in your
call it
book.
Yep, that's right.
I was thinking like how my husband parents is this is what he does. And this was in your book. I was like, he's doing great. He teases, he roughhouses, he is big on task orientation. I want to teach my kids how to be helpers. I want to teach them how to contribute. He gives them huge tasks to do that I'm always like, but I let him do it. I was like, so far, we've only visited the ER a few times. Like, we're okay. And I just see this level of grit in my girls too. It's not just my
Right.
son.
Right.
where they have this level of resilience I don't always see in kids. And I attribute that a lot to his parenting of being like willing to take risks with the kids. He, rustles them up, revs them up when they get hurt instead of just, providing just the nurturance, which I provide when they get hurt. But do you want to speak to that any more about the
Yeah.
paternal, how dad, and it's
But
okay to parent that way, that paternal nurturance, and boys need it, especially those 4 out of 5.
yep, and girls. You brought up girls are so important. Like I'm a dad of 2 daughters, grown now. I have grandkids, but when I was raising them, you can't help but parent based on your own brain, and so I'm definitely I'm more paternal nurturance. Even though as a therapist educator, I kind of lean. I'm what I call more toward a bridge brain. I kind of bridge male female somewhat, so I can talk and about my feelings and so on. But still, I was leaning toward the paternal. And in the paternal, a lot of what the paternal is about building resilience. So if we want a bottom line on what is paternal nurturance, of course, it's food, shelter, clothing. It's all the basics. But it's also, from a social emotional standpoint, it's about building resilience. And rough housing, throwing kids in the air, teasing them. Teasing is a really good example. Teasing behavior is about building resilience. It's not, we've kind of thought about it the last 20, 30 years and kind of in the pop psychology world and like, oh, you shouldn't tease because it hurts their feelings. Okay, so certain teasing hurts people's feelings. One has to be sensitive. But even then, the male brain is trying to build resilience in girls, boys, everybody. So that brain just leans toward this paternal aspect, which is I'm just going to tease you and you're going to have to push back. And resilience is not built verbally by telling kids to be resilient. Resilience is built by children meeting challenges. That's how the brain builds resilience. And, and whenever I see a resilience program in schools where it's so word oriented, I go, okay, but resilience is only built probably 20% through words. It's built through experience. And then you have to meet the challenge and you become resilient. So between birth and 20, you've met just so many challenges and you've become resilient. Well, the father's brain is wired for that. Now, sometimes he takes it too far, absolutely, but it's wired to build resilience. So when the father is doing what's called quick burst, I call it quick burst affection, where guys will do affection like for a few seconds or 5 minutes, quick burst, throw you in the air, and then we're done. That's quick burst. Females tend to have longer, right? They take longer in terms of their attachment strategy. And task specific empathy, like paternal nurturance gives empathy during a task. So we're doing this task. Oh, okay, you didn't do that well. Okay. All right, yeah, I hear you. That wasn't so good. Okay, now do this. So it's task specific empathy, whereas females tend to give empathy across the board more, just in their 24-hour day. And males with paternal nurturance, males are tending to say, okay, here are the rules, and you don't follow the rules, you're in trouble. And so we tend to see, this one is not across the board, but we tend to see more guys saying, okay, you broke the rule, here's the consequence. Whereas women are more likely, they're higher oxytocin, don't want the child to suffer. So they're more likely to say, okay, don't do that. Okay, all right. Now don't do that. Okay, nope, don't do that. They don't give the consequence right away as often as some of these paternal nurturance will do, where you blew it, you're in trouble. And there's all these aspects of paternal nurturance that I think are supported by the fatherhood research. So everyone's going to be aware that for the last 40 or 50 years, we've got this research showing that when kids are raised without dads, or if dad is not available, strong male role models, they don't turn out as well. They're more likely to be addicted. They're more likely, and the girls too, girls are more likely to get sexually abused. I mean, the list is really bad. So it doesn't mean every dad's a great guy and every dad is a good dad. But what the research is showing is that when you cut out paternal nurturance, you're not maturing your child as well. And from a brain neuroscience point of view, what's happening is you're not getting as much connectivity between the frontal lobe and the midbrain. So that child becomes 20, 25, 30, did not get all those years of not just the mom, but also the dad forcing maturation into the brain. So basically forcing connectivity between the midbrain and the frontal. And we took that away. The father wasn't there. So I think the fatherhood research really supports all this male brain research.
Absolutely. I agree. And the other thing I think this comes down to a couple things. when we think of rough housing, is that true that girls have, because of the activity in the parietal lobe, they feel pain more deeply, but boys
Yep,
have
more nerve endings. Yep,
reduced tactile sensitivity to
yep.
pain? And so when we think of dads, this paternal nurturance, whether it's a grandfather or an uncle or whoever, a coach, like whoever's with your son and who's this male kind of figure brings this energy into it, is there's a certain element of they are more likely to be aggressive and be drawn to aggression, whether you're providing it or the child's meeting that male's aggressive energy. And it can be very playful, it often is, but they can handle it so much better because they don't have the same tactile sensitivity.
Correct. There are more nerve endings, even just on fingers and female fingers. There's just more nerve endings for pain, right? So throughout the
Okay.
female system. So females are going to tend to not want to have as much physical pain. Females will give birth. That's massive physical pain if they have children. Absolutely. But we're talking across the lifespan, right? They're not going to seek out pain as much. And then the second reason they're not is they have all that frontal lobe activity. So their frontal lobe is going to say, that's too dangerous. We're not going to do
Mhm.
that. Or that's going to, I'm going to be in pain. We're not going to do that. Whereas the guys, right, not only do we have, fewer nerve endings and then all the different neural things like with parietal that you mentioned, but also with the frontal, we just don't have as much frontal activity. So we're not in as much into this, oh yeah, that would cause pain. I won't do that. Like an example I love to give, and everyone's going to think of their examples of boys doing dangerous things where they're
Yeah.
clearly seeking out pain. And then where they form teams to go seek out pain. Like football is of course a great example of it. That's you formed a team to chase an object moving through space, and you're going to be in pain. So you signed up for pain, and so of course resilience is getting built, but your brain is doing that, and the male brain is signing up for more pain. And it's just like the guys are much more likely to go climb skyscrapers and build skyscrapers. There are very few women on the 65th floor building the skyscraper. Their frontal lobe says, death. I'm not going to do that. And the guy's frontal lobe goes, I'll have a harness, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to take that risk. So you've got testosterone flooding through the male system, pushing him to take risks, and also pushing him to be more aggressive, not violent, mind you, but more aggressive. And so aggression nurturance will happen there. And then you've got the neural differences in the brain where they're parsing brain activities saying in the female brain, no. And the male brain saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna put my skis on. I'm gonna ski right off that snowy roof. And I'm gonna try to hit that bump there. Oh, I broke my leg. Okay. Well, that's bad. I shouldn't have done that. But then, a month later, oh, or no, that'd be 3 months later. Oh, I'm healed. I'm going to try that again,
Again, that's
So
basically the
it's a
narrative of my
neural
son
difference.
doing these
Yeah.
terrifying things. And I was raised with a very active dad and brothers. So I think I tend to parent more that way because that's how I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time as a kid,
Yeah.
where
If
I'm
you had
like,
brothers, yeah.
it gets fine. Like we visit the emergency room sometimes, but for the most part, I feel the more we allow boys to roughhouse and to do these dangerous things, like within reason,
Within reason. Yep.
they become very competent in their bodies and they have much higher self-esteem as a result of this.
Yep. They're competent in their bodies and in their brains. Like their social emotionals are developing every time they do one of these things. Every time they do this dangerous thing, this high risk thing, they're developing social emotionals. Males develop their social emotionals not necessarily through words. And our whole approach to social emotional the last few decades has been, words. Like the social emotional SEL programs that are in schools, very word oriented. We're going to get together in groups and we're going to talk about this. And, it's all great. That's all great. But male social emotionals, midbrain connecting to the top of the brain, we are developing most of this stuff through tasks, through activities. And if we form teams in those activities, then we're doing our social emotionals with the teams and maybe the coach mentor. And so we're developing just as good social emotionals, in my opinion, as girls, different, but just as good, as long as we're doing these tasks and activities with these people. It's when we're isolated, and that's the deaths of despair. That's the big problem with males. When they isolate, then they're not maturing. They're not getting the social emotional development. They're not doing the high risk things. They're not getting aggression nurturance. They're also not getting empathy nurturance because they've isolated. So my belief has always been, raise them in a 3-family system, nuclear, extended, and then institutional. Raise them in a 3-family system, provide them with gobs of opportunities, tasks, people. They're going to develop fine.
Yeah. But I think you're making sure that they have both. Like you're saying, there has to be that feminine brain influence in their lives somewhere. And then you have the masculine paternal, and this can be other people, obviously, not just
Oh
a
yeah.
nuclear family, so they can have an opportunity to gain both types of almost like brain influence in terms of their brain development, that we need both for these boys to grow up in a healthy way. And I think it's good for girls too.
Oh yeah, the three family system, what I call the three family system, that's going to have, hopefully nothing has happened to mom. It's going to have mom. That's going to have grandmas, grandpas, aunts. Grandmas, in this case, grandmas, aunts, female peers. And then even the institutional family is going to have a lot of female influence, like in education, 90% female, right? Pre-K through 6. So definitely want the female influence.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We want
Yes, and
equal.
I think it's
We want
very
equal.
egalitarian, Mike, what you're saying. We're not saying one is better than the other. They're
Nope.
just different, and both are required for healthy development. That is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's the key. They are equal and they're both required. That's the thing that I think other people are not realizing, that they're both required. And yet the fatherhood research shows it. And of course, in that research, mom's already assumed. Like, we don't
Yes.
have equal motherhood research because everyone knows mom is assumed, right? Mom is bringing her gifts to the child. So we need to see the paternal be equal to the maternal. But that does not mean erasing the maternal. No, no. The maternal is crucial.
Yeah. I think people get upset because they think that's what we're saying, and that's not what your research is saying
Yeah,
at
no one
all.
I know is saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know I really love these. So, any moms of really young boys listening, or teachers, these are like two things I live by when I'm working with boys. And then, Mike, please jump in with the research here. Visual before verbal with our
Hmm.
voice. And if the bum is numb, the brain is the same.
Right.
That's how when I was a kindergarten teacher, those are like two principles for like working with little boys. I used to do dance breaks with the boys, give them tasks. If they were getting dysregulated, I don't sit and talk to them. I go give them something to do. Take this note to the principal. And it's just something being like, can you give him a task to do in the office, please? Like, just give him
Right.
something to help with. If I saw my boys in therapy, if they're come in and they're all full of like, you can just see they've had a horrible day. They don't want to talk about it. I'm like, let's do a push up competition. Ready? Go. And we would do push ups in my therapy room just to re
Right.
engage the
Good.
brain. Like,
Right.
why do these boys need less talking and more movement, and less verbal stuff, and they need more visual and movement? Like, why is that?
Okay. I'm going to talk about that based on the two great strategies you gave: visual before verbal, and then the rest state. In other words, if the bum is numb, etc. Okay. So a lot of the right side of the male brain is very visual. And we want to remember that the right side of the female brain is visual too. However, the female brain has word centers there. So she's using a lot of that space for word centers. So males don't have the word centers there on average. They don't have the word centers there. They've got more developed spatial mechanicals and visual graphics. So one of the first strategies 35 some years ago, when I did my initial research on this and training for teachers, was have them draw what you want them to write. Because the boys would be getting C's and D's, and the girls were getting A's and B's, right? Because the teacher would say, okay, I want you to write a paper about blank, whatever blank is, about going somewhere or about some subject. And the girl's brain, right? She's got all these word centers, more frontal activity. And by the way, she can sit still because of this rest state brain thing I'll talk about in a moment. So she's just writing away, just writing words and sensorial detail and all this great stuff. And a few of the boys are like guys like me who always wrote a lot. I'm a writer, but 4 out of 5 of the boys were just given a prompt, a verbal prompt, write about such and such, and they're just staring at the paper. They've written a sentence, they're mad about it, they tear the paper up, they can't get it out of their brains, right? Because the female brain is better set up to immediately create verbals. So if the guy draws, so just take a big piece of paper, cut it, do a one line down, one line across. You've got 4 quadrants. Have him draw whatever he's going to write in these 4 quadrants. Okay, so now he draws it for the first 20 minutes. She may already be writing, but that's fine. He's drawing. He draws the stick figures, or he draws colors, and whatever is going to go in there. And then 20 minutes later, he starts writing. So now he's writing away because he's looking at what he drew. So what we did is we got the right side of his brain going with the visuals, and then that helped us to get the verbals going. And sure enough, we started seeing these male grades go up to A and B, right? From C and D. And it was because of using these strategies. So another strategy was let them move around whenever they need to move around. And the reason is it's neural. The male brain goes to a rest state, or what we call a boredom state. And you can just see it on any scans of this. Once he's bored, his brain shuts down. So all that we have is survival functioning, breathing, etc. But the rest of the brain is shutting down. So he hits a boredom state, and you can kind of see his eyes might flitter, or he's staring at you, but there's nothing happening, and you just know this brain is in a rest state. And this happens with husbands too, by the way, with men. We hit a rest state, and this is a leftover from hunting, so it's on the Y chromosome. We hit a rest state many times per day, and especially at the end of a day. So I always say to parents, like, okay, don't bring stuff up, well, to husbands or to boys that are big stuff that you need talked about until their brains have hit their evening rest state. And then after they listen to music or whatever they do for 20 minutes to get out of, to process and get out of the rest state, then talk to them about that. Well, it's the same with teachers. If we don't realize, and none of us were trained in this, right? When we came through college, we never saw these brain scans. So if we don't realize that the female brain doesn't go to a rest state like the male does, but that the male goes blank, then they're just sitting in these chairs for 45 or 50 minutes. And counselors too, we weren't trained in this. This guy's sitting in the chair 45 or 50 minutes. He's 4 out of 5 times, he's just not going to produce what we need. And in a classroom, if his brain is blank, he can't produce. He doesn't even remember the directions, because the directions were given while he was in the boredom state. His brain was blank. So every 10 to 20 minutes, what teachers really need to do is they need to get the boys, and it's good for the girls, to get up and move around. And they can do jumping jacks, or like you said, do push-ups, just do stuff.
Anything.
Because once the body moves around, the cerebellum, the doing center in the brain, has to be triggered. And then it's going to send more signaling up into the areas of the brain that are going to learn. But if the body isn't moving, the cerebellum's not activated. And so the top of the brain won't be either. That's the rest state part.
Beautiful. Thank you for explaining that. I know with my son, compared to my daughters, he will ask if you gave him directions at the wrong time, he's like, what did you say? Right. Versus the girls hear it, I swear, every single time I give them directions. And I've noticed that with my husband too. You got to catch them at the right time if they hear it at the right time. And what I just heard you say was get them moving. So basically, light the brain up, then give them the directions. Versus if he's in a boredom state, he's kind of tuned out. Like you can just see he's kind of spacey. You ask him and he's just like, what planet am I on? Like, what did you say? And that would explain where he is in his brain. We're not operating in the right level yet, the right wavelength.
Yeah, we didn't understand the male brain. I mean, really what this comes down to is so many of our social issues, whether they're micro issues in counseling, males, or teaching issues in teaching males, or marital issues, or national issues. I mean, just policy issues. I got to say that most of these issues, if they in any way intersect with males, most of these issues come down to the fact that we don't understand how the male brain operates. So we have set up systems, even policies, that do not take into account the male brain. And circling back to what we said initially, right? We sort of did this. We decided not to teach people about the male brain because of politics, what we call gender politics. And what we really ought to be doing, and this would even serve our gender nonconforming, gender, fluid kids, what we ought to be doing is teaching everyone about female brain and male brain, and then gender as an add-on, because gender is social construct. So that's an add-on. But the female brain and the male brain, that's what you come into the world with. Wherever you are on the spectrum of male, wherever you are on the spectrum of female, a lot of variety, but you still have that brain. So if you teach people about that brain, then they develop strategies, on how to work with that brain in this situation, how to work with that brain in this situation. And then we start seeing systems change. And I know this because for the last 30 years, we've been doing this work in schools and with counselors. So we've gathered a bunch of success data. So we can see how the grades for all students go up when the teachers are trained in how boys and girls learn differently. That book you mentioned, right? We've trained like 60,000 teachers. And then we track their classrooms and they track their classrooms. And we have a bunch of this in Boys at Rescue Plan, by the way. We have a lot of the data on how this works. And not just the boys' grades going up, but the girls' grades go up. The test scores, boys and girls. And one of the reasons that education becomes better for girls when the male brain is understood is, of course, you're going to understand the female brain in comparative, but also because now the teachers are not spending 15 minutes in classroom management, which is mainly a boy issue. They're spending about 1 minute in classroom management because they know how to speak to all the brains. And so now the girls have not been robbed of 15 minutes of learning in every classroom, right? For the teacher to do the classroom management. So everyone's grades go up, everyone's test scores go up, the discipline referrals and behavior, discipline referrals go down, and the behavior gets better. The bullying, less bullying. I mean, all these things that we have as issues we want to deal with, we see specific change by training people in the male brain.
Beautiful. So with now the two that I'm really familiar with, so any educators, I mean parents would benefit for especially the first three chapters for boys and girls learn differently.
Yep.
So that is the brain science of, to me especially, you have beautiful tables in there that explain anatomical and looking at hormonal differences and what that translates to in terms of their movement and how they express themselves and how they need to learn in the classroom. Saving Our Sons, which I just finished reading, and I wish we had more time to talk about the male emotional intelligence. That's like a whole podcast in itself. But this really talks about how men express emotions, how they process emotions, how also you have a whole section here on screens.
Yeah, very important.
And
yep.
Right. Like it's how it's different. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different. But your new book, how does that differ? I know you have many books. You have 32.
Yeah.
So how is this one a little bit different? And it's coming out in February. And if you're hearing this at the podcast, it's out now. Check the notes for the podcast.
Yeah, February 2025. It's really the culmination really of my work, I would say. But I'm also writing it with Sean Kuhlman, who is the director of the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. So one thing in the book is much more on sex and gender. So much more on, like, for instance, I use the term brain sex dysphoria to distinguish trans from gender dysphoria, which is gender. These are new terms that are not used that I hope we'll get into DSM at some point. So I'm developing, a lot of stuff in there that's new to help people to be able to carry on conversations and meet the needs of everyone across this, the gender spectrum. And then also we have a lot on policy in this book. I would say I have more, Sean and I both have more about policy here, about what has to happen at a policy level to solve the male suicide crisis, the fentanyl crisis, the imprisonment crisis, right? The incarceration crisis of 2 million males imprisoned. We're obviously doing something wrong raising kids. That is too many. That's in the US. So across the board, what has to happen policy wise? And then we have probably 30 or 40 strategies for teachers and counselors in there. So it's got a lot of strategies, and it also is trying to deal with the crisis at the policy and data level.
Yeah, I really encourage everyone to look at Mike's research on this. It reinforced so much for me of how I've been working with boys in counseling. And some people think my counseling looks really strange. I have boys walking in the forest with me. We go to the park together. I started an animal assisted therapy program, which at first I primarily used with my boys because they needed to move their bodies and they don't do well looking face to face and talking. It's always shoulder to shoulder. They need to be in nature. They need to run and move. And that's where my best therapy happened. And then I started raising my son in the same way. And honestly, he can talk about his feelings better than my girls can now. Like, because I gave so much of that motor learning for him, and we did so much integrative work with also the female and the male, the paternal and the maternal pieces, that his social emotional intelligence is higher than my stepdaughter's. So it's incredible when we allow for this, but we just have to honor the differences that exist. And this is what equality means. We can't just mitigate them and pretend they don't exist. They do exist. Right. And your research substantiates the differences.
Yeah, beautiful. I love the way you put that. Yeah, people worry they can't get their males to, emote. Well, okay, boys will not spend as much of their life talking about what they feel as girls and women. Oh. That's true. That's fine. It's a brain difference. But social emotional can go just as well for boys as girls, as you've said. We just got to get at it in a male way. And in the 1 in 5, we don't. The highly sensitives, they're already wired for massive verbal emotives, we call it. So connecting words to feelings. But the other 4 out of 5, we really need to do it this way if we want to get the thing we want, which is boys talking about their feelings.
Thank you so much. So for everyone listening, you will see some links to the books that I mentioned. So I'll have Boys and Girls Learn Differently, Saving Our Sons. I just finished that one and it's excellent because I love the social emotional learning piece. So that to me as a psychologist is really big for boys. And then we're going to air this again for our podcast for the release of your book, the new book in February. So if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can go to the show links and you will see a link to purchase Mike's new book, A Rescue Plan for Boys. correct? That's
Boys, comma, a rescue plan.
Boys, comma, rescue plan. Thank you so much. I just love your work so much. And I hope parents everywhere learn so much from you. We see this as, I think, a cultural issue. It's a sociological issue. It's an issue in psychology, in our parenting. It's something we all need to sit and pay attention to. So thank you for bringing this to light.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me, and let's do it again. You're awesome.